Welcome, welcome. You listen to 360 Info. I'm your host, Antonio. What you do for yourself depends on what you think of yourself. And what you think of yourself depends on what you know of yourself. And what you know of yourself depends on what you've been told of yourself. You know, that's timeless right there. And I think it speaks volumes as far as what's going on in the African-American communities all over the world. Yes, well, we experience a little decent weather right now here in Cleveland. I'll take it for December. It look like we may have some mid-range, mid-30 temperatures all the way on up to the third week of December. Hopefully no clippers come down from Canada or so, but we'll take it right now. On the other line, I got my man in his homemade studio there. Brother Vince Robinson, how you doing this, sir?
Doing well, just looking out the window and seeing how we, got a little wet ground out there after the snow that we got last weekend. And you know how they say, wait 20 minutes and it will change. They're talking about snow tomorrow again, but, it's December.
Yeah, hopefully it's like I said, that shower light stuff. So I don't know about they're not saying major because I hope it ain't changed since last night. Looked at it.
Yeah, I probably not.
Yeah, well, that's good. Yeah, I'll take the light snow. I'll take the night snow. Yeah, so we got a great show for you today. We're waiting on our guest to call in. We might have did some pre-marketing of it. We got Dr. Umar Johnson coming on today for those who wants to chime in and tune in, discussing some things that is, I think is important and I think is ever so prevalent to what's going on and relevant to what's going on around the globe right now. And I think there's, by talking to some of the other scholars that we have around the country, from, Dr. Coleman and Dr. Jeffries and Malafia Santes, and our brother Wayne Chandler kind of tapped on a little bit about the photon energy belt and this energy on the planet. So, and I think this movement of awakening is reaching all out to the diaspora to where we got to make that connection. So I want to talk a little bit about that connection when we get Brother Umar on the line and why we may be thinking about repatriation and why is that important and why we need to connect, and I think it's been a stumbling block, and a void in our whole progression of our existence here in this country and, for times past, that we need to make this connection, I think, to become whole. That's how I feel about it. So what do you think, Vin?
Well, I just wanted to mention the fact that when you talk about our scholars, just within the past week, I've had the privilege of seeing Dr. Malafia Santi online. I've seen Dr. Leonard Jeffries online. And I'm just seeing a growing awareness of Afrocentricity through social media. So we have these new tools at our disposal. Philippe Matthews out in California has Kaba Hiawatha comedy on a regular basis. And so we're really getting exposed to our elders. And I am happy to announce that we also are tied into the media now. We have a new application that we're using. It's called StreamYard. And after this show, I am inviting folks to go to the 360 Info Network Facebook page and obtain the link and come into the broadcast room and have a conversation about what we talk about on the show or anything else that might be on your mind. So all you have to do is go to the 360 Info Network Facebook page. You can obtain the link. You can also go to my Facebook page and scroll down the timeline. And then what we would like to do is be another resource for our elders to tell their stories. It was absolutely amazing to hear some of the stories that Dr. Asante was telling, and Leonard Jeffries was, they were talking about, being at the Olympics in Mexico when John Carlos,
Dr. Umar Johnson on hold,
put his fist up in the air and made that iconic photograph possible. So you can join us by going to 360 Info Network's Facebook page and clicking on the link, and you'll be welcomed into the room. We'd also like to welcome Dr. Johnson to open up that link and join us if he cares to. But we're really pleased to have him on the show today. So I know, Brother Antonio, you had some things you wanted to mention about Dr. Johnson before we begin the interview.
Oh, yeah. We're going to speak. Let's bring him on and we can get into the conversation.
Okay. Yeah, and
he's online.
I would just say that, Dr. Johnson is not a stranger to 360 Info Network, so I don't know that we need to have a long, lengthy introduction to him. He is a noted child psychologist, and he is a featured public speaker around the world on everything having to do with Marcus Garvey and Frederick Douglass. So we welcome to 360 Info Network, Dr. Umar Johnson.
Peace and Black Power. Good Garvey Day, brothers. Glad to be back with you.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, sir, my brother. Yes, sir, my brother. It's always a pleasure, I recall one of the first times that I heard you speak, and I was like, man, this brother got some fire on. Then I said I had to reach out to him, and we definitely had to get you to Cleveland, a couple of times, because he had a message to spread, and we had to help get that message out. Brother, what I wanted to start off talking to you today about, it is dear to me, and, and it may be a recurring topic, about this movement, this awakening, this connection, because I know you're pan-Africanist to the heart, and, and I don't think we can talk enough about, the necessity of making these connections and that growth, because I think it's been a real big void in us as a people and as a community, because a lot of times when we talk about our history, we just go right and stop right at slavery, and and our kids, I think it affects our kids when everybody else is looking at themselves being superheroes as young age, and seeing the guy come on on the white horse in the cowboy movies and save the day, and they talk about us as being slaves. So I think that's a psychological effect that we have as far as growing up too as well. So and let me say this before I open it up to you, Dr. Johnson, is that I think that plays a major role in where we at today, of us with that big disconnect right there. So it's a topic that I would love to continue discussing, and we can have a good conversation about it today. So welcome, my brother.
Oh, thank you. Glad to be back. And I owe a big apology to the city of Cleveland because, just to say before I offer my comments, because this part of the year has served as my 10-year anniversary from the beginning of, for lack of a better word, my transcendence into the national and international Black conscious movement, which began in the fall of 2010 with Chicago, New York City. I just did a book release in Fort Lauderdale this past Thursday, December 10th, which was my 10-year anniversary for Fort Lauderdale, October 30th, New York, September 18th, Chicago, Atlanta, Georgia, November 19th. I made it to all those cities. Nat Turner Land, 1111. I made it to all 5 of those destinations, but one was left out, and it was Cleveland. And the reason Cleveland was left out, Brother Lynn, and of course, much thanks to you because you're the first person to bring me to the city of Cleveland. I don't know if your listeners know that, but you were the first one to bring me into the city of Cleveland. And when I looked back, I had to dig through my emails and dig up the dates, because I knew Chicago was first and New York was second, okay, because those 2 cities were pivotal in my explosion back in 2010. And then the next city was Cleveland, so you guys was actually third. But the problem, Brother Lynn, was I didn't realize you guys were third until after the date had passed. You guys were also in September. And so it was too late to do the exact date, because with all 5 of the other cities, I was blessed enough to do the exact date. So I'm just saying all that to say that I'm going to make it a point to get to Cleveland at the start of the new year to do the book release for the new book, Black Parent Advocate, The Art of War for Dealing with America's Public and Charter Schools, because I left y'all out of that 10-year anniversary tour, and I'm so sorry about that.
we forgive you, brother. We know how things go. It's all right. As long as you come see us, my brother, it'll be all good.
Okay, Brother Umar.
Absolutely. And to that end, for both of you brothers, I need y'all to kind of just brainstorm in your spare time a location where we can hold the book signing. It won't be a lecture because of the COVID. None of the things has been a lecture. It's just been a book signing, meet and greet. People can stop in, talk to me, take a picture, get their book. So we don't need a large space. We use the restaurant in Chicago. We use the art studio in Brooklyn. We use Nat Turnerland was outside. Where else were we? Charlotte was at a small studio, but it was so nice and warm outside. Fort Lauderdale was at a small studio, but it was so nice and warm that I was able to be outside. So we don't need a large space. It could be a restaurant. It could be a bookstore. It could be a studio, just enough space for people to come in. With that being said, getting to the question at hand.
Yes, brother.
I totally agree with you.
Yes, brother.
Yes.
We have to go to a break real quick, but just real quick, I do have a space that can be used for that very purpose. But I also wanted to invite you to join us online. Since you haven't been able to make it to Cleveland, the best thing is to do the virtual piece. So I'm going to give you a link to go into a broadcast room, and we can actually give you an opportunity to promote that. You're listening to 360 Info Network on AM 1490 WERE with Hamtonio, Vince Robinson, and our very special guest, Dr. Umar Johnson. We'll be right back. We're back on 360 Info Network, Hamtonio and Vince Robinson, and our special guest, Dr. Umar Johnson, who has exciting news to share with us always. He's all over the place. He just told us that it's a different paradigm now. He's used to speaking in places that he goes to, but we can't create large audiences such as those as he's accustomed to. So we're rolling with the punches. But welcome back to 360 and Dr. Umar Johnson. Before we took the break, you were just about to give us an answer to the question that was posed to you by Hamtonio. The floor is yours.
Absolutely. And that speaks to the issue of our children largely being introduced to their history through the medium of slavery and the institution of European chattel slavery in particular. I think that has been very detrimental to the awakening of African consciousness within our youth. But I would also add, in addition to that, so that would probably be one of the worst aspects of Eurocentric education, introducing our children into a knowledge of self through the medium of slavery. But I think also added to that, to a lesser extent, but definitely related, is the fact that the black community itself often socializes our children into a knowledge of self by way of arts and entertainment. And I also think that that has been a detriment to our young people as well. So in school, you're being taught that you're only good enough to be a slave, and actually you're doing much better now because you were a slave then, and we civilized you. So you've actually made progress. And for me, that's why the foundation of historical education starting in slavery is a political disaster, because if our children look at it and say, hey, we were once slaves, now we're NBA players, we're basketball players, and of course we're so much more than that. We have the doctors, the engineers, the business owners, but they don't get to see that. That's not paraded in front of them. It's all about the entertainers and the athletes. And so from their perspective, if I started as a slave and now I'm a multi-million-dollar football player, I'm obviously on the road to success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a, one thing, Doc, that, I think that another thing that I think our people don't realize, because they all want to hang their hat on, justifying the disconnect with Africa. Well, they helped sell us into slavery, and I go on to say, well, you got all different kind of ethnic groups. The Indians sold guns back. The whites sold guns back to the Indians, and the Indians helped track down other Indians. People selling secrets and government secrets. I said, don't hang your hat on that. But when we were brought over here through the transatlantic, people were thinking that, the Africans afterwards, were just chilling at the beach, having good times, and, the same issues that was going on over here was going on over there through colonization and killing leaders, man. One of I think was P.O. Lumumba, he spoke on a lot of leaders that were killed over there that I never even heard of before. That was fighting for liberation, and we don't know that history.
Absolutely. You raised a very good point there, brother, because right now we are in the midst of an anti-African, Negro-American tribalism movement right now, where a lot of groups are popping up. We're not from Africa. You know, we were already here, this, that, and what have you. And, of course, we were already here. We were. But as we learned from the great Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, the great Dr. Yusuf Ben Yakinen, who are now ancestors, even our brother David Imhotep, who's still with us in the flesh, who wrote the book, Africans Were the First Americans. We were already here, but we came from Africa, and there's absolutely no way to disprove that. But the point you make is so valid, and that is you want to constantly point out how Africans may have directly or indirectly participated in the transatlantic slave trade, the Ma'afa, but at the same time, I don't see you pointing out just as effectively the ways in which the Native Americans, directly or indirectly helped to maintain African servitude in the States. For example, the 5 major Native American tribes were all in support of African slavery and helped to maintain it. You don't hear about that. Many of them were involved in the hunting down and the tracking down of fugitive slaves, but you don't hear these anti-African Negroes talk about that. But they will go out of their way to find fault with the African, but will say almost nothing about the Native American, bragging about how much Native American blood they have and how much Cherokee and Choctaw and this and that and Swanee they have in their blood, but yet the Native American tribes have done absolutely nothing to aid the black man and woman in America in their quest for liberation. And they have made it absolutely clear, those who do have and have received the casino concessions from the U.S. government, many of them have written it into their particular law on their reservations that no African Americans whatsoever can lay claim to any of the royalties or any of the resources that they have on the Native American reservations, even if they can prove that they have Indian blood.
We wanted to also talk about the idea of repatriation. It's really a struggle, and you're connected with the pan-Africanism that was espoused by Brother Marcus Garvey. Getting African Americans, Africans from the diaspora, to embrace the thought of going to Africa, having anything to do with Africa, making investments in Africa. For many, it's just a stretch because there are so many of us who don't even ascribe to our African roots. In being someone who promotes and advocates Pan-Africanism to the extent that you do, what do you see as the means by which we can get folks to connect with their authentic African selves?
Well, firstly, I would say that I think right now we are in the midst of a great repatriation renaissance. In fact, there's been some articles written over the past decade speaking to what they call the second great migration. So they call the first great migration was the move of our ancestors and grandparents from the south to the north. That was the great migration, and now they're looking at the move of Africans from all over the continental United States over to the continent. There have literally been, since Y2K, since the beginning of this millennium and century in the year 2000, over the past 20 years, thousands of African American families have repatriated to Africa. I'm getting messages on WhatsApp just about every month of brothers and sisters who I've met who are now living in Africa, and I didn't even know that they were in the process of making a transition. Just before COVID hit, I did my last black parent training boot camp in Long Beach, California, and one of the good sisters who went with me to Africa just 2 years ago, the last trip, we didn't do one in 2020 due to the COVID, but a sister who went with me to Ghana during the year of return in 2019, she may have already done so, but she was in the process, her and her son, of repatriating to Africa. So there are a lot of Africans doing it. And at this point, I'm kind of comfortable with the rate in which we're doing it. And the reason I say I'm comfortable with the rate in which we're doing it, because we have to be somewhat careful of endorsing a wholesale repatriation, only because, as you know, a lot of our people are not in their right African minds. A lot of us are toxic to the American African community and will likewise be toxic to the continental African community. So I like the rate because so far, most of the brothers and sisters I see repatriating back home are ones who have their African mindset. And I would be very concerned about a wholesale repatriation where you're taking Negroes who are totally indoctrinated for European customs and values going back to the continent.
Well, those Negroes that you're speaking of, they probably don't want to have anything to do with Africa. So to a certain extent, I think it would be moot. But I just wanted to point out the irony, Brother Umar, the fact that 2019 being the year of return and you're seeing record numbers of Africans from the diaspora returning home to connect, and then COVID hits and they stop the plane traffic to the continent. And now everyone is concerned about, I got to get a COVID test. I may have to get a vaccination. I might have to get a shot. And I don't know if I want to go through all that to go home. Could you comment on how ironic it is that we would have that record flow to the continent and all of a sudden see a sudden interruption?
I absolutely believe that one of the lower priorities of the COVID campaign was without question to disrupt the continuity of the repatriation movement and to disrupt the continuity of the exchange and collaboration between continental Africans and American Africans. Without question, I think that was one of the goals of the COVID campaign. And right now, I'm in the process of planning my 2021 group tour to the continent, which we usually take the last week of July, first week of August, and we were going to do Rwanda, Uganda, and Kenya. But the brother who is working with me on the tour, who lives on the continent, we both had concerns about the fact that every country we travel to wants you to have taken the invasive COVID test where they stick the syringe all the way up your nostrils. They want you to take that form of the test before you leave the previous country, and then when you land in the receiving country, they want you to take it again, which in essence, including the United States, would mean everyone who goes with me would take about 8 separate COVID tests. That's 8 separate opportunities for them to infect us by sticking those things up in our nose. So as a result of that, we're probably not going to do Rwanda and Uganda, and we're just going to settle on Kenya to keep it down to 2 or 3 tests. So that is definitely disrupting the Pan-African climate. And we're just keeping our fingers crossed, and we're hoping that the United States government does not come to require us to have been vaccinated to either exit the country or to return to the country. Because if that happens, that is going to very seriously affect the repatriation movement. And for those brothers and sisters who just want to visit the continent and come back to the United States, that's going to basically yield that entire effort, ineffective and unusable. So we're patiently and anxiously seeing what the white power structure is going to do as it relates to this mandatory vaccination protocol.
Oh, so
you know what? What I was thinking, what I think needs to be said is that, we have to acknowledge some of the awakening of the people on the continent, and this movement of, their sovereignty, getting rid of colonial laws, and the movement in Rwanda and, Ghana and things of that nature, and some of those French-speaking countries trying to get their own currency. Now, the question and the concern that I have, and this is an interesting question, Doc, and it's something that we need to look at, and it's one of the things that I'm worried about. How easily is our colonizers, are they going to let that movement happen? What stumbling blocks that we need to look for that them allowing that growth to happen like that, and allowing the actual countries to actually sever those particular ties with them. You know, it's because Europe is like some of the countries in Africa is like a piece of rental property. You know, Europe is in its conditions because of them feeding off of the colonies in Africa. Are they going to allow that movement to transfer freely, that awakening? So I'm wondering what stumbling block is going to take place for them to circumvent that movement, that rise and that consciousness on the motherland. What do you think about that, Doc?
When we were in Africa, Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats also made a trip for the year return. And I think they showed up a week before we did or a week after we did. I can't remember. And I don't think that was a coincidence. I believe the State Department sent them over here to spy, to see whether or not this year of return was just a cultural thing and a psychological thing, a historical thing, or whether or not it had any serious political or economic consequences. We have to remember, back in the 70s or 80s, there was a national state security memorandum that was issued, and I believe it was issued by Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the founder and the mastermind of the Rockefellers Trilateral Commission for Global Control, and he said that the only serious threat to American global imperialism was the operational political economic unity of continental Africans and American Africans. So this came directly from the State Department, that the only thing they're concerned about that could threaten America's imperial goals on the continent and around the world was basically Pan-Africanism. So they sent the Democrats over there to see if this was really a political economic renaissance or just another, historical charade. And I think a lot of the brothers and sisters who are repatriating to Africa, they're starting on the grassroots level, which is good. It's necessary. I have no problem with it, but we're going to need to make some power moves. And when I talk about making some power moves, we're going to have to make some serious investments into the African banking system. We're going to have to build some serious institutions. Same things we need to do in Black America must be done in Black Africa. But until they see us making power moves, I don't think the European power structure is going to be too concerned. But I also think, along with the European power structure, is you now have the Chinese power structure on the African continent. And what I see the Chinese doing as a means of preparing for this second great migration of African Americans returning to the continent is they're trying to buy up as many native African industries as possible. So, for example, right off one of the slave dungeons, I forget if it's Elmina or Cape Coast Castle, there's a lot of fishing there. And the Chinese have bought, I think it's Starkist, don't hold me to it, but one of the top two largest sardine companies is owned by the Chinese, and they have the water right there off of the coast of the slave dungeon as one of their major fishing capitals.
Elmina,
yeah, and I heard about that.
Yeah, Elmina and Cape Coast both have fishing around the vicinity of the dungeons. As a matter of fact, there are a number of fishing boats that are right outside of the door of return at the Cape Coast slave dungeon.
Absolutely, and most of that fishing that is not done domestically, meaning the brothers and sisters who go out there to fish for their families and fish for the local market, the large-scale fishing that's done off the coast of the dungeons is actually being done for the sardine company, Starkist, and there's one other one, but one of them, if not both of them, we were told while we were there, was just recently bought by a Chinese company.
Yeah, and the last time I was there, they were actually prohibiting the Ghanaian fishermen from fishing. They actually shut them down for whatever reason. I don't know exactly what, but
yeah, well, some of that was due to up in that same area around Tukrati. I don't know if that's the team report. One of them is that they're drilling oil, and they're prohibiting them from fishing because of the oil that they're drilling in that particular area. And then there was some real pushback with some of the natives there, and not allowing them to fish because that was the major resource of their income up there. So they was at that time, this was about a year or so ago, trying to figure out how they was going to work that out between the fishermen and the oil companies there.
Yes.
And to your point, one of the biggest problems all across continental Africa, and of course my brothers and sisters on the continent, they're sending me local news articles all the time because it's hard to get a lot of the local stories here in the States. But I'm getting articles every day of where local African governments and police are having to arrest Chinese. This is becoming a growing epidemic because they are fishing illegally, they are mining illegally, they are drilling illegally, they are stealing things that don't belong to them. The Chinese are literally respecting no African laws, no African customs. I mean, brothers and sisters are telling me they'll just go somewhere on privately owned land and they will start drilling, looking for gas, looking for oil, looking for gold, looking for anything. And this is why the Chinese are trying to lay siege to so many of the African ports. And this is why I'm so disappointed in the government of Jamaica, because they recently sold the port of Jamaica to the Chinese. The reason the Chinese want the ports is because if they have the ports and they have their people illegally drilling, illegally fishing, illegally mining, then all they have to do is get their stolen goods to the port, and the Chinese shipping companies will see to it that it's shipped back off to the mainland of China. So this is a very dangerous thing. Africa needs to slow down on letting the Chinese in, but the problem is they've already signed so many contracts with these Chinese corporations to come in and build things that some of them are at the point of no return.
Well, you know, Brother Umar, those agreements are being made for certain African leaders to take advantage of, and obviously for the Chinese to take advantage of. And you have a lot of interaction with brothers and sisters on the continent, and I was just curious about your perspective on what it's going to take, the nature of leadership that will ascribe to the principles of colonialism and not pan-Africanism. From a grassroots level, what are you seeing in terms of political mobilization to change the nature of African leaders who will, bow to the whims of the Chinese and the European colonialists?
And I know that Brother Len mentioned earlier PLO Lumumba, who is one of the leading Pan-Africanists on the continent there. His organization just reached out to me a couple weeks ago to participate in a groundbreaking conference, an economic conference, a basically Take Africa Back economically conference that he's going to be hosting in Abuja, in Nigeria. He's going to be hosting in February. It was supposed to be in November, but I know I had difficulty getting my visa. Everything's backed up through the COVID, and getting a visa for Nigeria is going to be difficult anyway because it's so populous. And so he pushed it back to March. So I'm looking forward to returning to Nigeria for my third time to participate in that conference. But him reaching out to me, I thought was very, very, very important, because it's important for the various Pan-Africanists around the planet to start mixing and mingling and organizing this thing globally, because I think the people are ready. And this, having been to the continent, our African Pan-Africanists, continental Pan-Africanists, are more ready and serious than American Pan-Africanists. And that's because, see, the media is not as effective in brainwashing Africans as the American media is effective in brainwashing American Africans. On the continent, they know exactly what's happening. Like, there's very little propaganda control in Africa. Like, they know it, they see it, they know the white supremacy, they see it. In Africa, it's more of a religious control, whereas in America, I would say it's more of a media control. Not that the churches don't have our people inoculated and brainwashed as well, but over here, it's more of the media. It's more of the distractions of the black bourgeoisie and the entertainers. But on the African continent, you really only have to deal with the religious control. Once you're able to see through the religious indoctrination, most of our brothers and sisters over there can see clearly the political challenges that they face. I always say, if I lived in Africa, I would probably have to have full-time security, because those brothers and sisters over there are so ready for revolution that I know I would be considered a vital threat.
Yes.
I feel the same way. You can kind of see that, but I think this little period, that time period that when you usher in change like that, this little time period, I think there's just something that we have to deal with. And, I remember reading something, listening to something too far as Gambia is concerned, where we had some issues, which you spoke earlier, brother, about us coming back with a certain type of attitude. And one brother and sister went back over there with that kind of Slick Willie type of situation and actually caused some issues. Cause some issues, and so, that's something that we definitely have to look out for, and that's a problem, So, but again, I kind of agree with you about the movement, and the course that it's taken right now. I think it's good, and as Vince elaborated on a little bit too, the ones who are really interested in doing something and going, are the ones who are actually going to take that piece on faith. And basically what I was saying too, what kind of slipped my mind, was that with that problem that they had in Gambia, it's you got to go over there, with the mindset of trying to learn some of the traditions and engulfing yourself into the culture. You know what I mean? And so something like my brother said, we're gonna have to get to know each other. It's we realigning and joining and hooking up with our African brothers. So it's gonna take time. There's gonna be some little conflicts or some misunderstandings, and but that's just a phase that we're gonna have to go through. That's basically what I was trying to say.
Yes, and just
Absolutely.
to add to that before we go to the next break, I was watching Dr. Molefi Asante on Philippe Matthews' show earlier in the week, and Dr. Asante said something really interesting. It just gave me a completely new perspective, and that's the fact that we are all descended from all those different nations of Africa. So, when you look at your brother, the brother might be Wolof, it might be Igbo, he might be Akan, but when we look at each other and here in America and other places in the diaspora, we're actually looking at the descendants of Africans from Africa. So, like when we go home, it's like reconnecting with ourselves. And I, to Lynn's point, or to Antonio's point, it is so important for us to go back and not just isolate ourselves, but become a part of the fabric of culture that we're returning to. So important. Leave the American Negro at home. Go to Africa and rediscover your African roots. You're listening to 360 Info Network right here on AM 1490 WERE with your hosts, Antonio, Vince Robinson, and our very special guest today, Dr. Umar Johnson. We'll be right back after these messages. We're back, 360 Info Network on AM 1490 with Antonio and Vince Robinson, our special guest, Dr. Umar Johnson. During the break, we were talking about the reality of COVID-19 and the impact that it is having on global travel and all other kinds of things. Dr. Johnson, you had a few thoughts that you wanted to offer on the reality of this virus and what it might be a cover for. Could you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. And first, in support of the point you made just before the break about Pan-Africanism and the fact that those of us who are the descendants of those who had to endure the Ma'afa, we do in fact carry the genetic code of probably, any one of us probably has about 20 to 25% of the various genetic codes on the continent contained within each one of us, because when they brought us over here, as we all know, they amalgamated us across cultural and ethnic lines. So I think that it's no coincidence that Pan-Africanism was born in the West, born in the United States, and it was born by those who, for lack of a better word, have a Pan-African DNA pattern. Like, we are probably the most diverse Africans in the world by virtue of the conglomeration of all those various African genetic codes and DNA strands that are within us. So we really are the Pan-African people. And that's why it's so important for us to play a leading role in Pan-Africanism, not only because we gave it to the world, but also because it's going to be the only solution for our people. And we are a walking living manifestation of true Pan-Africanism. Someone asked me not too long ago, they say, you don't want to take the test to find out exactly where you come from in Africa? I said, the test is really cutting myself short, because no matter who they tell me I come from, whether they place me in Nigeria or place me in Gambia or place me in Ethiopia or place me wherever they want to place me, I know that there's so much more to the configuration of my DNA than that, due to the amalgamation of different ethnic groups throughout the Ma'afa while we were being brought over here. So we have everything in us. So there's no need for us to lay siege to a particular nation, particular country. We are all of them. And it works politically, because when I'm in Africa, if I'm in South Africa and there's an issue between a Zulu brother and a Xhosa brother, or, if I'm in Senegal and there's an issue between a Wolof brother and a brother from another nation, or in Nigeria you got an issue between an Igbo and a Yoruba, I can help work that conflict out, because I'm beholden to neither ethnic group. I'm beholden to neither nation. And so the American African, being genetically Pan-African, we can really play a decisive role in ameliorating a lot of the conflicts that take place on the continent.
I hate to raise this issue, but it has to go. It has to be said. There has been a disconnect from our spirituality when we walked away from our relationship with what we call God, with what we call nature. Could you talk about the impact that religion has had on separating us from our authentic selves?
Religion has been such a destroyer of African consciousness and unity, in that, in our case, the religion replaced the culture. See, it's one thing to have your culture and then to join a religion, because no religion is sufficient to replace culture. You're looking at 100,000 years of African culture on the short end. You could probably make the argument 500,000 years of African culture, because every time they think they know how old African people are, they find out later we're older. So even if you take 100,000 years of African culture, how can you give that up? Why would you exchange that for 1,500 years of Islam in total respect to the religion, or 2,000 years of Christianity in total respect to the religion, or 5,000 to 10,000 years of Judaism in total respect to all those religions? But that is no match for 100,000 years of African culture. But because slavery snatched our culture from us and put religion in its place, we have used the religion as a culture, and that has been extremely dangerous, because the two biggest lessons in religion that work against the unification of African people and the ability to politically understand our enemy's behavior is, number one, love thy enemy, and number two, to view family in terms of religious allegiance. In other words, a European who is a Christian is more your brother than an African, because y'all share the same religion. Now, you and the African share DNA, y'all share genetic code, y'all share culture, y'all share history, shared experience, but because the European is a Christian, you will treat him as a brother and reject your African, who is your true brother by blood. And it is those two lessons, loving your enemy and rejecting your brother if he is not of the same religion, that has wreaked havoc throughout the African world.
Okay. Did you want to make a comment about COVID as a cover for the transfer of wealth and the global transfer of wealth, actually?
Absolutely. Not only is COVID a cover for the global transfer of wealth, and I would say the reconfiguration of financial monopolies. And the reason I say the reconfiguration of financial monopolies, this COVID agenda had a lot of goals. One of the goals was to, was to sabotage growing economies in the so-called second and third world to make them redependent on the European powers of the world all over again. In other words, they were looking at how the Caribbean economies were growing. The African economies were growing. The Nigerian stock market, one of the strongest in the world. Nigeria, the fastest growing economy in the world. They were looking at this. And this threatens what? Economic colonialism. So one of the uses of COVID was to sabotage all of the growing markets in the second and third world in order to make everyone what? Dependent on the white power structure again. So you have countries that were doing well independently who now have to crawl back to France, crawl back to the UK, crawl back to the United States, crawl back to the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Another goal of COVID, good brothers, was to eliminate the elderly population off the face of the world, especially in Africa. A lot of people don't know this, but Africa is home to the oldest people in the world. It is not uncommon to come across a village in Africa with a couple of queen mothers and babas who are well beyond the age of 110. It is not uncommon at all. Africans live very old. And guess what? Africa is also home to the oldest population of women in the world. Here's the problem with old people and capitalism. Old people don't work, and old people don't shop. Capitalism only needs two types of people, workers and buyers. If you don't work and you don't buy, you're better off dead. And so one of the purposes of COVID was to do what? Get rid of as many elderly in the world, not just in Africa, but primarily in Africa. One of the reasons Italy got hit so hard with the COVID campaign is because Italy is home to the oldest European population in the world. So COVID was a way to get rid of, quote unquote, useless eaters, old people who become dependents on the society as opposed to being those who can be enslaved to the corporation.
It's almost like a reset as well, you know, like the Great Depression. It's a reset. And who tends to always benefit from that, you know, when they do that?
Yeah, I must give kudos to Africa, because one of the things that the African leaders did, and we must commend them on this, most of them, not all of them, rejected Bill Gates's COVID vaccination protocol. Some of them initially signed on, and then they changed their minds, and I want to salute them, because Africa has the lowest rate of COVID in the world, and that's because the African heads of state, most of them refused the vaccination protocols. So kudos to them for finally standing up to the European powers of the world.
We have just a minute before we go to break, but in light of your status as a child psychologist, I wanted you to reflect on the impact that this new virtual learning is having on our black and brown students across the country.
Oh, wow. Wow. Quickly stated, and we can pick it up on the other side of the break, COVID was a blessing and a curse. It was a blessing because it gave parents an opportunity to teach their own children so they could learn that it was possible. But it is currently a curse because we're looking at epidemic numbers of black children being referred for special ed because they're not doing well at home learning on the computer. Not because they're learning disabled, but because they are bored and they're not able to focus through a computer. So we're learning that online schooling is not the best way for African children.
Okay. So there definitely need to be some adjustments made, because right now we're losing in that proposition. And so many of our students don't have access to computers or Wi-Fi, so they're not even able to do any learning at all if it could be accomplished. We'd like to thank you for joining us on 360 Info Network, the radio version. We're going to migrate over to the StreamYard version at approximately 10 minutes after 12. So we invite you to go to Facebook and pick up the link. You'll be able to get in the room. Dr. Johnson will be able to get in the room. Hamtonio, you as well, and we can continue our discussion. We'd also like to remind folks that you can become a sponsor of 360 Info Network by reaching out to our brother Stephen E. Boyd at 216-526-1297. That's 216-526-1297. Give Steve a call, have a conversation with him, become a sponsor of 360 Info Network, and move this ship forward. We need the assistance of our community and the businesses who stand to gain by being exposed to the audiences that we have right here on AM 1490 WERE. We'd like to thank our engineer, Tristan Sanchez. He made us sound real good today. We appreciate the effort, and we appreciate you listening. With that being said, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself. Make it a great day, Cleveland, and the rest of the world.
Peace.
Peace.